easily obtained, highly encrypted communications, PlayStations, for example, has made it a lot easier for them to evade authorities.
But how exactly does that aid them with respect to getting through these dragnets and obviously there's a sort of a trail. There were a lot of arrests. There was the scene in Belgium. How do they continue to stay one step ahead? It can't just be access to PlayStations.
Well, if they have, well, it's not just PlayStations. It's a number of apps. There are a whole bunch of highly compartmented and classified apps that can be used on phones. Now, I think that depends on how many contacts he has, but if he has a whole bunch of contacts in different places and he can find out it's easier to go north than to go south or whatever, having communications and not being alone and on the run is a big deal. I think it also, we're now at about the second anniversary of the changes that Snowden brought about as a result of presidential directives and legislation and so forth passing after he committed what I would call his treason. And under those circumstances, in Presidential Directive 28, I think it is, we're supposed to treat even terrorists like this, very much like American citizens in terms of their rights to privacy and the rest. So you would see the United States used to provide lots of useful information on terrorists and others to foreign countries like Belgium. Right. It may be a lot harder for us to do it now because of what Snowden's treason.
But see, you also say there could be an inside job as well.
Well, look, the ambassador is absolutely right when you look at the high tech that's involved here. But I also think we need to look at the low tech, for example, the human element. ISIS is well financed. They planned and executed a well written operation. So in my estimation, if he's in Syria, we don't know that yet, there had to be people along the way. There had to be somebody, in my view, on the inside that helped get him out.
When you say the inside of European intel operations, that kind of thing?
Oh, look, we've seen it in World War II. We've seen it during the Cold War. People are embedded in intel operations. They're embedded along the way. If you think about World War II, the French underground, all right, they were getting people in and out of it across borders. So what I'm talking about is, yes, Charles, people being embedded and people being bought off. There's a lot of money involved here to execute an escape.
Ambassador Woolsey, what about that theory? It's really alarming. It's really frightening if it's even plausible.
Well, I think that's a very good point. ISIS has a lot of money. They had 150, 200 tank trucks lined up for months, one after the other, with $1 million a day of money for them, and they kept producing it. And finally, we got around to bombing the trucks after a year of fiddling around. Yeah. But ISIS is relatively wealthy and getting wealthier because of the oil.
Well, the thing we all know, I think, if he is in Syria, they will make some sort of video real soon gloating about this. So stay tuned. Thanks a lot, guys. Yep. Hey. NSA's phone data collection program expired yesterday. Now, this despite the fact Europeans are saying they're having really some success using the same sort of programs to track down terrorists responsible for the Paris attack. Also, they say it's prevented attacks as well. Steve Rogers and Rod Wheeler are back with me. Steve, I don't know if the NSA's program has saved any lives or tracked anyone down. I would assume that it has, but at what cost to privacy do you think is it worth it?
Well, look. Apparently, President Obama does not understand what the president of France understands. We're at war, and when you're at war, the rules of engagement change. Look, I understand the civil issues, rights to privacy, et cetera, but when you're at war, you've got to use every tool possible to protect your citizens. And I will tell you this, based on my experience with the FBI Joint Terrorism Task Force back in the early 2000s, I believe, yes, the NSA has saved lives, period.
Yeah, but here's the thing, though. People are saying, we have this information. We've had a lot of information. Go back to 9/11, and these agencies have it, but they don't share it. Even over in Paris, you saw where one guy was a suspected terrorist. He had to check in weekly. He missed a few check-ins. No kind of, nothing to go out, no all points bulletin, let's arrest this guy ASAP. It feels like even with this information, Rod, they slip through our fingers, which makes it even more of a critical question as to what do we give up as individuals if we're not even going to use the information properly.
Well, you're right, and that's going to happen from time to time, no matter what kind of program you have. Look, my colleague Steve Rogers is 100% correct. We are in a war right now. I mean, in the West, we are in a war, and when you are in a war, you have to do those types of things that may, some people may look at as infringing upon their rights, their privacies. But, until we get this thing under control, Charles, we're going to have to change the rules for a period of time. Now, just so that the viewers understand, with that NSA surveillance program, it's not like the NSA was listening to telephone calls when you'd call your grandmother in Oklahoma. They were listening and watching and monitoring telephone calls to some of these countries back and forth from the United States to Yemen to Pakistan to places like that. And I think that's what they're supposed to do.
So do we, I guess because President Obama, perhaps to your point, doesn't take this seriously. It feels like we've always fought it as a police action instead of a war and bring it to the sort of rules of engagement that go along with war.
Well, that's right. And, Rod's correct. Who cares if Grandma's talking to Junior? And does Grandma and Junior really care that the NSA, are they losing sleep?
I don't know. She may be telling them that secret recipe. I don't know.
But here's the key to all of that surveillance. Connecting dots, Charles. Phrases, words. That's what they need to connect dots, and you're going to get that through this type of surveillance.
All right, guys. Well, let's leave it right there. I got to tell you something. I have had mixed feelings on this, but I think we got to do what you guys said. We've got to protect this country at this particular time.
That's right.
Thank you both very much.
You're welcome.
Bashar Assad is a major cause of the refugees which are now flooding Europe and causing such consternation in the United States. A no-fly zone will provide a refuge, at least for some of these refugees.
I cannot stress to you how urgent it is that we destroy ISIL. Every day that goes by that they hold millions of people under their sway is a bad day for us, because they're going to hit us at home if we don't put them on the run.
Well, that was Senators John McCain and Lindsey Graham, both urging Washington to right now send 20,000 troops to Syria and Iraq, 10,000 each, to fight ISIS and solve the Syrian refugee crisis. The United Nations so far says that more than 4.3 million people have fled Syria since the start of the civil war. About 2,300 of them have settled here in the United States. Back with me, Steve Rogers, Ambassador James Woolsey, and Tammy Bruce. Ambassador, a lot of folks are divided on this. Some say troops on the ground might or may not help. Some say we may or may not be able to get the Sunnis to help. But it feels like steady as she goes is not working.
Well, it's deja vu all over again. Senator Graham and Senator McCain urged back in 2007 or so, when the war was not going well, urged the surge along with General Keane and others. The surge worked, and by the time President Obama took office, the war was going quite well. He decided to withdraw completely, and as a result, he's ended up, and not to challenge Bashar Assad, even though he said he had crossed a red line when he used chemical weapons against his own people. As a result of this kind of fiddling around approach in the Obama administration, we've started now to see something very much like the mess that existed when the surge was urged some years before. Yeah. How many times do we have to go through this before people realize if you're going to fight a war, you have to fight it. You don't fiddle around with it.
Yeah, fighting the war to win would be a novel thing these days. Of course, President Obama had his own little surge that actually worked again. So we've seen these surges work. But again, this need to get out responsibly, I call it retreating responsibly, is at the top of his agenda. But is it too little too late to say, now let's send in ground troops?
Well, it is. Look, I mean, this is the end of 2015. We need, for any plan to work, you've got to have a commander-in-chief who cares, whose heart is into it, who is a warrior, who understands what it's going to take. If there's anything in Barack Obama, we know that's not it. So you would actually you'd be putting at risk these 20,000 troops. The rules of engagement are non-existent, and if they exist, it is so that you don't wake up, let's say, Afghans in Afghanistan by firing on the enemy in the night, or you don't want to relieve yourself in the direction of Mecca. The rules of engagement put our troops at risk, and I agree we should be going in there, but with a commander-in-chief who is committed to that line. Clearly, Barack Obama's not. And look, you've got Lindsey Graham, who's a failed candidate for president. Same with John McCain. John McCain lost to this man, and he is going to sit there and now say what needs to happen. It's an insult and highlights the problem also with the Republican Party.
Steve, waiting 2 years and hopefully for the right new president to make this decision, that would be a long time. I mean, a lot bad things could happen between now and then with this current plan.
Charles, the only exit strategy for American troops is body bags, for goodness sakes. Look, what about Saudi Arabia, Jordan, and the countries that have a lot at stake here? What about these young, strong men, these refugees who should be doing the fighting? The point is this, and we forgot one more point. All right, when and I hope we don't do this, but if we go in and we beat ISIS, what do we do when we come face to face with Vladimir Putin's army? What are we going to do with Russia?
And the Iranians.
So you're saying don't do anything, just let it go.
Strategic bombing, massive bombing, and let the others take care of the ground.
You've got Iranians and Russians on the boots on the ground there now.
All right, guys, thank you all very much. Appreciate it. And of course,